Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Jacory Croskey-Merritt, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my top 45 running back rankings as we approach our upcoming 2025 fantasy football drafts. Now, with so many running backs to talk about, again, a quick reminder for those of you who are looking for my thoughts on a specific running back, be sure to travel down to the description of the video. There are timestamps available there. While you're down in the description, of course, be sure to subscribe to the channel as we're making daily fantasy football content with live streams ahead, for the singular goal of trying to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship, and of course help us get one step closer to achieving our goal of 100,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough for all the support. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's talk about my top 45 running back rankings, beginning with our number one, Bijan Robinson, who sure had a slow start to his 2024 campaign, but from weeks 6 through 18 was the number one running back in terms of fantasy points per game on average, averaging 21.05 points per game. Incredible production, but continued to take a step even further when Michael Penix took over the starting quarterback position from week 16 through 18. Throughout that span of time, averaging 25.63 fantasy points per game, while the Atlanta Falcons as a team in the final 3 regular season games of their 2024 season were averaging over 30 points per game as a team. So again, incredible production, the addition of Michael Penix elevating this offense and going into this upcoming season behind arguably the best run blocking offensive line in the National Football League with the second easiest strength of schedule at the running back position based on rushing statistics. I think this is an easy decision. Don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. Select Bijan Robinson in 2025. Our number 2 is Saquon Barkley, who's coming off of an incredible season of 2,000 rushing yards. And again, between weeks 1 through 21, when we include the NFL playoffs, he was averaging 21.64 fantasy points per game, elite level of production. And this is all while he was tackled down at the 1-yard line on 11 different instances. So again, we saw a lot of touchdowns for Jalen Hurts in terms of the quarterback sneak that they continue to develop within the Eagles offense. But going into this upcoming season, even if we do anticipate some regression from Saquon Barkley, sure, he may not rush for 2,000 yards. I still think he is certainly capable of being in this top 3 conversation, considering the elite offense he's associated with and the elite offensive line that he plays behind. And even though many like to point at the idea that we haven't seen a running back repeat year after year as the number one in terms of fantasy points per game or total points per game, when we look at Todd Gurley 2017 and 2018, in both of those seasons, he was the number one running back in terms of half and full PPR, whether it's fantasy points per game or total points. So we're anticipating to see, of course, Saquon Barkley follow in the footsteps of some of these other elite running backs and find himself with another successful campaign here in 2025. The number 3, speaking of running backs who have had elite level of production year over year, we're talking about Christian McCaffrey when he's been healthy. But in his last 4 healthy seasons, he's been a top 3 overall running back in a half PPR in all of those 4 seasons. But the question is, of course, can he stay healthy? I know many of us got burnt last season when the injury was, of course, announced on August 6th of 2024, where, of course, Christian McCaffrey was dealing with a calf strain, which eventually turned into, Achilles tendonitis on both of his Achilles. But going into August of 2025, we haven't heard a single peep of a potential injury for Christian McCaffrey. In fact, the only thing we've heard is about other 49ers being injured and Christian McCaffrey, in fact, being the only healthy running back on roster, behind a top 10 run blocking offensive line with the 6th easiest running back strength of schedule based on rushing statistics. The reward of selecting Christian McCaffrey and the payoff looks like 23 plus fantasy points per game in a half PPR and 25 plus in a full PPR. As of right now, if we go ahead and travel on to Betr, again, the numbers really don't speak to the potential success that we may find with Christian McCaffrey. When I travel on over to the NFL season, go to the running back position in specific and travel all the way down here where Christian McCaffrey's hiding. He has 3 projections. As of right now, his number is at 930.5 rushing yards. We'll absolutely take more on that because in the last 4 healthy seasons he has played, 2023, 2022, 2019, 2018, he has surpassed 1,000 rushing yards in each of those 3 seasons with relative ease. I expect Christian McCaffrey to have a bounce back year here in 2025. Now, for those of you who are trying to potentially put in your own plays via Betr, of course, you could travel down to the description today and check out the link when you travel on over to Betr. Today, not only can you go ahead and put my predictions to the test and make your own plays, but you can get my rankings for the remainder of the season. All you have to do is sign up using code Andrew, make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, and make a first-time play minimum of $1 within the Betr Picks section. And then at that point, you're good to go. Your email will be on my list, and I'll send you an email every single week for the remainder of the season. Over the course of the month of August, updated draft rankings for both half and full PPR, by position, by tier, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, flex at a top 200 rate. And of course, those Sunday morning rankings will be sent to you every single week for the remainder of the season in order to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. So go ahead and check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. And if you play up to $10 today via Betr, of course, you get $30 instantly. So take advantage of the opportunity, get those rankings, and of course, dominate your fantasy leagues this upcoming season. All right, let's continue on with the S tier with, of course, the one and only Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs has the highest ceiling of potential production amongst all the running backs that I've mentioned. Even though we talked about Bijan Robinson playing with Michael Penix last season and averaging 25 plus points per game and a half PPR, what Jahmyr Gibbs accomplished in the absence of David Montgomery was legendary, averaging 25.8 opportunities per game, but scoring 30.93 fantasy points per game. Amongst all running backs in 2024, he was number one in terms of fantasy points per touch, averaging 1.11 fantasy points. This being among all running backs with 100 touches minimum in 2024. Now, if we go into this upcoming season with the anticipation of seeing Jahmyr Gibbs get more opportunity share, of course, it's going to lead to more fantasy points. But when we talk about what he was able of accomplishing with David Montgomery last season, only 16.8 opportunities per game and 17.55 fantasy points per game. Yes, he may get more opportunity share, and we're hoping he's going to get himself closer to 20 total touches per game. And that could get him into the conversation of being a 20-plus point fantasy producer on a given weekly basis. But I don't believe that David Montgomery is going anywhere. This is an offense that is predicated on having a two-headed monster, and both of these running backs continuing to abuse defenses, whether it's near the goal line or whether it's even in the passing game, as we saw David Montgomery heavily utilized in that category. Regardless of this, of course, we know that if anything was to happen to Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs is clear in a way going to be the number one overall back when it's all said and done in 2025. But as it currently stands with Montgomery in the mix, Jahmyr Gibbs is my number 4. To close out the S tier, again, we have so many running backs to mention on today's episode. I had to include Derrick Henry into this tier, considering, again, he has just been Mr. Consistent. He's King Henry for a reason. He's been a top 8 overall running back in 5 of the last 6 seasons. He's been top 5 in terms of fantasy points per game in 5 of the last 6 seasons. Last season, amongst all running backs, the number 3 overall, and in fantasy points per game, number 3 overall, as he averaged 19.57 in 19 games with the Baltimore Ravens, while setting a career high of a 5.97 yard per carry average during the regular season. Derrick Henry has proven year over year that age is just a number, and when we're talking about getting a consistent first-round selection in the back end of the first, what better option than King Henry for our 2025 fantasy football drafts? All right, let's begin the A tier with Ashton Jeanty, rookie running back out of Boise State. And in his final year at Boise State, had 2,601 rushing yards, only second to Barry Sanders in terms of the NCAA history. Again, incredible numbers. And when we talk about elite level running backs coming out of college and being selected as high as Jeanty was, he joins other running backs such as Saquon Barkley, Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, Todd Gurley, Jahmyr Gibbs, in terms of running backs in the past decade who were selected within the top 12 of their respective NFL draft. And not a single one of those running backs I just mentioned ranked below RB11.5 PPR in their rookie year. So, of course, Ashton Jeanty soon enough is going to be in the conversation of this S tier. If there was more space, we could theoretically throw him into the mix. But as we approach the 2025 season, with the potential of this new offensive coordinator, Chip Kelly, bringing in his run-heavy approach that we witnessed in 2013 to 2015 with the Philadelphia Eagles, as he was the head coach and primarily play caller of that team. Those Chip Kelly offenses from 2013 to 2015 averaged 409 rushing attempts per season, 121 targets per season, 530 opportunities for their running backs, and over 390 fantasy points per season to their running backs. When we have elite level talent plus elite level opportunity, that makes the number 6 running back for our upcoming 2025 fantasy football drafts. Number 7 is Chase Brown, who many of you know is one of my favorite running backs to draft this season based on what he was able to accomplish last season and the situation that he's involved within. Of course, he's associated with one of the highest scoring offenses in the National Football League, an offense in the Cincinnati Bengals who has produced a top 12 ranked running back in 4 consecutive years. Of course, Chase Brown was able to accomplish it in 2024, but the 3 years prior, we saw Joe Mixon dominate in a top 12 capacity. Now, from weeks 9 through 17, once Zach Moss went down with his injury and Chase Brown took over this backfield, in the final 8 games of Chase Brown's season, he was averaging 18.25 fantasy points per game because he was averaging 4.75 receptions per game and a plethora of receiving statistics that if you take that and spread it across a 17-game season, we're talking about 94 targets, 81 receptions, 635 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns, which in 2024 would have been number 1 ranked in all 4 categories at the running back position. The Bengals offensive coordinator Dan Pritchard this offseason has said that Chase Brown is everything that Austin Eckler was, and that he believes that Chase Brown is going to be a household name by the end of this upcoming season. I'm anticipating him to get a lot of utilization and, of course, score a lot of fantasy points for us this season. Number 8, we have another one of these young running backs who came on strong late last season. We have Bucky Irving of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who from weeks 12 through 19, in the final 7 games of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers season, post-bye week was a dominant force, averaging 18.7 fantasy points per game because he was incredibly efficient in terms of his rushing workload. 5.42 yards per carry, number 5 amongst all running backs with 50 rushing attempts minimum last season. 4.03 yards after contact per attempt, which was number 1 amongst all running backs with 50 attempts minimum. And when we take into account he was number 1 amongst all running backs in terms of avoided tackles per attempt and routes run, they're utilizing him more as a receiver in training camp. They're going to utilize him all over the field as he is clear in a way taken over this backfield, and it's going to be his. And sure, we may see some sprinkles of Sean Tucker and Rachaad White, but Rachaad White has effectively been faded out of this offense, especially considering the final 2 games of the 2024 season. The final regular season game and the playoff game, we saw Bucky Irving have 40 total touches in comparison to Rachaad White's total of 3 touches. I'm anticipating him to be in this top 8 category for sure by the end of the 2025 season. Number 9, we have the thumbnail of today's episode, who again, I have moved up greatly within my rankings based on the most recent news of Daniel Jones being named the starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. Now, when we look at the 2024 campaign of Jonathan Taylor, though there were some injuries mixed within, he was averaging about 24 opportunities per game, which was leading to 17 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. He has scored 18 touchdowns in his last 19 healthy games. And if we could put together a full healthy season here, there's going to be a lot of potential because the receiving utilization that wasn't acted upon in this most recent season will now effectively be there because of Daniel Jones. Last season, Colts running backs, when Anthony Richardson played the entirety of a game, were getting an average of 2 targets per game as an entire backfield. Daniel Jones in his 2022 campaign with the New York Giants was targeting running backs 6.13 times per game. If Jonathan Taylor is going to be utilized within the receiving category, it's going to look very similar to his number 1 overall season back in 2021 when he had 40 receptions and he had Carson Wentz, a former highly drafted starting quarterback from a different organization, specifically within the NFC East, that came over to take over the starting quarterback job. Sounds a lot like Daniel Jones within this situation. Of course, we're expecting for upside from Jonathan Taylor. We have Achane as our number 10. Of course, we've all heard the news that he sustained a calf injury on August 14th. He's been ruled out of practice as a preventative measure based on, of course, they want him to be ready for week 1. That is the goal. Based on everything that we have read, everything that we have seen regarding his calf injury, the expectation is that a normal calf injury takes about 2 to 3 weeks of rest in order for him to be prepared and ready to go. And by the time we get to the beginning of the season, week 1, he'll have 3 weeks of rest, which for many of us is perfect. Now, for those of you who don't want to risk the potential of re-injury and him missing consistent time or potentially even missing early on in the season, perhaps they get to week 1 and he doesn't feel 100%. They're not going to throw him out there because of the potential of an Achilles injury happening after a calf strain. Of course, we've seen many of athletes sustain that in recent history. But when we're talking about, what Achane can present when healthy at a full rate with Tua Tagovailoa under center, last season, in the 11 games in which they played together, he was averaging 19.51 fantasy points per game, 6.09 receptions per game, was targeted on 26% of the routes that he ran when Tua was under center. Again, a lot of potential for production going into this upcoming season, but we're going to be very cautious with Achane. I've moved him down to my number 10. We'll keep an eye on it, and as we get closer to our upcoming draft, if we hear a little bit more positive news regarding his recovery, of course, we'd be willing to take him back in the kind of 6 to 7 range in between Ashton Jeanty and, of course, Chase Brown. On number 11 to begin the B tier, of course, is Josh Jacobs, who last season with a healthy Jordan Love was averaging 17.16 fantasy points per game in the 14 games they played together. Jacobs quickly became the number 1 option of the Green Bay Packers offense because of the injury to Jordan Love. But with Jordan Love being back and healthy and being able to run, of course, he sustained a knee injury in week 1 of the 2024 season. With the rushing upside that he presents, and of course the ability to throw the ball, there's going to be less of a need for Josh Jacobs to have to carry this team on his shoulders. Even though last season he was incredibly efficient, I don't think they're going to completely turn away from him, but we may see less opportunity for him in terms terms of the rushing category, even though he was averaging 3.49 yards after contact per attempt, a career high, and number 8 amongst all running backs last season. He had 67 missed tackles forced, which was number 4 amongst all running backs last season, and 33 rushes or 10 or more yards, which was number 6 amongst all running backs. He scored 15 rushing touchdowns in the last 11 games, and we have already seen the Packers and Matt LaFleur be able to support an RB1 for 5 of the last 6 seasons, so why not once again for Josh Jacobs in 2025? Number 12, we have Kyren Williams, who from weeks 1 through 17 of last season was the number 6 overall back, and of course, was number 10 in terms of fantasy points per game on average, averaging about 22 opportunities per game and nearly 16 fantasy points per game. Now, from what we have seen from the LA Rams, Sean McVay has always wanted to utilize one back and one back only. In very few instances have we ever seen him have a rotation, and that was primarily after the Todd Gurley kind of era in which they weren't 100% confident in Cam Akers, because we have seen Sean McVay does not like rookie running backs. Even this most recent season, even though they utilized third-round draft capital on Blake Corum, we saw Kyren Williams dominate 83% of the total opportunities and touches out of this backfield and scored an 89% of the backfield fantasy points for the Los Angeles Rams offense. And even if you bring in a guy like Hunter, who they drafted in the 4th round of the 2025 NFL draft, I still anticipate Kyren Williams to have the entirety of this backfield. And even though he doesn't have receiving upside, luckily for him, he has scored 31 total touchdowns in the last 28 games as an offense that is continuing to elevate with Matthew Stafford being healthy, the addition of Devontae Adams, and of course, a healthy offensive line that is, based on PFF's grades, expected to be top 5 within the rushing category this season. Number 13, we have Alvin Kamara, who's been top 12 overall and top 6 in terms of fantasy points per game in 6 of the last 8 seasons. He has been incredible, and very similar to Derrick Henry, he is proving that age is just a number as Alvin Kamara enters his age 30 season here, dominating and coming off of a season in which he was averaging 16.64 fantasy points per game on 23.6 opportunities per game. Now, again, when we're talking about a running back who's been top 6 in terms of fantasy points per game on average in back seasons, you may be thinking, Andrew, why is he number 13? Well, he does miss about 2 to 3 games every year. And if that's going to take place once again this season, I think the number 13 overall position is fantastic, especially when you take into account he's going to be a check down monster, as we have Rattler and Shuck as the quarterbacks that are going to be rotating here for the New Orleans Saints. With negative game scripts, of course, the ball is going to go in his direction often. And even if they're running the ball heavily early in games, they have the 4th easiest running back strength of schedule based on rushing statistics. So, of course, I anticipate Alvin Kamara, in the absence of Taysom Hill, especially early on, to find himself scoring many of touchdowns and, of course, putting up great fantasy point totals for us at a discount because many people are sleeping on his potential. Number 14, we have James Cook, who, again, for back-to-back seasons has finished as a top 12 ranked running back. So why do I have him at number 14? Again, from what we have seen most recently, Joe Brady has moved away from utilizing James Cook at a high rate in terms of total opportunities and touches because of Ty Johnson and Ray Davis efforts. And of course, the rushing utilization of Josh Allen, it has taken a little bit of the burden off of the shoulders of James Cook to be an every down back and have to touch the ball 20 times per game. This most recent season from weeks 1 through 21 averaged 16 opportunities per game and 16.5 fantasy points per game. Primarily because, again, he scored 16 total rushing touchdowns, which was ranked number 1 and tied with Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs within that category. We're all anticipating regression within his total touchdown category, and if that's going to take place, of course, we would anticipate him to drop within our rankings. Now, if the situation presents itself in which he is getting far more touches than he saw last season, then of course he'll be fantastic. But when we go ahead and we travel on over to Betr and potentially travel to the running back section and look at the 2 projections that they currently have with James Cook, his number for rushing touchdowns this season, again, he scored 16 last season, is 8.5. I think that's far lower than I expected, and a number that I'm keeping an eye on and potentially putting in a couple plays for, whether it's with that Christian McCaffrey play or not, potentially putting it in regards to other plays in regards to total touchdowns. But I think 8.5 is far lower than where I even have him projected going into this upcoming season. So taking more on that may be a play in which we're following. Number 15 to close out the B tier is Omarion Hampton. This is the second rookie running back that we're talking about on today's episode. Of course, Ashton Jeanty as our number 6, but Omarion Hampton as our number 15, primarily because when we talk about first-round selected NFL running backs, again, there's a lot of potential for success based on the history that we have seen over the course of the last decade. In the last decade, we've seen 14 running backs selected within the first round of the NFL draft. 11 of those 14 running backs were top 24 ranked within their rookie year. 8 of those 14 running backs were top 12 ranked. So a 79% success rate in terms of being top 24 ranked and a 57% success rate in terms of being top 12 ranked. And when we take into account in 2024, J.K. Dobbins dominated within this offense with nearly 18 touches per game and 14 fantasy points per game. And prior to his injury last season was the number 14 overall back, number 13 in fantasy points per game on average. And when we take into account that Najee Harris has an incredible chance to miss week 1 of this season, I would anticipate Omarion Hampton to begin the season as the starting running back, take over, and of course be an incredible fantasy asset for many of our teams. Now, when we travel back over to Betr and we potentially take the more on his 8.5 rushing touchdowns, considering how much rushing upside, high upside the offense for the Buffalo Bills has. And we want to pair that up with someone like Omarion Hampton, who currently is sitting at 870.5 rushing yards. I'll take more on both of those numbers going into this upcoming season via Betr. Of course, when we pair that up with someone like Christian McCaffrey, who we talked about earlier, going higher on his rushing yard total. Of course, these are 3 plays that if we go ahead and put it within an entry, is a solid play going into this upcoming season. When you travel on over to Betr today, not only can you go ahead and put my predictions to the test and make your own plays, but you can get my rankings for the remainder of the season. All you have to do is sign up using code Andrew, make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, and make a first-time play minimum of $1 within the Betr Picks section. And then at that point, you're good to go. Your email will be on my list, and I'll send you an email every single week for the remainder of the season. Over the course of the month of August, updated draft rankings for both half and full PPR, by position, by tier, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, flex at a top 200 rate. And of course, those Sunday morning rankings will be sent to you every single week for the remainder of the season in order to help you capture a 2025 fantasy football championship. So go ahead and check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. And if you play up to $10 today via Betr, of course, you get $30 instantly. So take advantage of the opportunity, get those rankings, and of course, dominate your fantasy leagues this upcoming season. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next running back I wanted to mention. Beginning the C tier is Kenneth Walker, who earlier today returned to practice after dealing with a little bit of a foot injury. But when he's been healthy, he's been incredibly promising. And if he can stay healthy all season long, he will be an incredible fantasy asset and has the potential of meeting that top 12 upside, because the new offensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks, Clint Kubiak, the former offensive coordinator of the New Orleans Saints in 2024, gave their running backs the 8th most opportunities amongst all teams. And of course, Alvin Kamara averaged the 6th most fantasy points per game amongst all running backs. Even when we travel back to his 2021 efforts as the OC of the Vikings, the 10th most opportunities to his running backs, and Dalvin Cook was the number 11 running back in terms of fantasy points per game on average. When you give someone like Kenneth Walker opportunity, it leads to success. Over the course of his 2024 campaign, when given 12 or more rushing attempts in a game, was averaging 16.34 fantasy points per game. If you're considering drafting Kenneth Walker, do yourself the favor. Draft Zach Charbonnet, get his handcuff. So regardless of what happens in this backfield, you have the entirety of the value at your disposal for the 2025 season. Number 17 is James Conner, who since becoming a starter in 2018, regardless of what team he's played on, he's never played a full healthy season. And that's kind of why he sits at number 17. But yet he has still been a top 20 overall ranked running back for 4 consecutive years. So as long as he continues to get the workhorse level of opportunity share that the Arizona Cardinals have exposed him to over the course of the last 2 seasons, we're anticipating continued success. In 2024, of the 14 healthy games he played, 12 of those games consisted of 17 or more touches. Last season, averaging 19 touches per game over those 14 games, and of course, averaging 16 fantasy points per game. On top of the fact that he has the 3rd easiest running back strength of schedule in terms of rushing statistics, Kyler Murray was top 5 in terms of check down rate amongst all quarterbacks in 2024. We're still anticipating James Conner to be an ample threat within this offense, especially down within the red zone. Number 18, we have Chuba Hubbard, who from weeks 3 through 16 last season when healthy, 21 touches per game and 16.08 fantasy points per game, was handling 83% of the total touches out of this backfield, being hyper efficient on the ground with a 4.78 yard per carry average, number 11 amongst all running backs, and 3.46 yards after contact per attempt, and number 8 amongst all running backs. Now, sure, he's expected to lose a little bit of his receiving upside that he was able to acquire last season because of the addition of Rico Dowdle within this offense. But even with that addition and the loss of fantasy point total there, he's expected to have the easiest running back strength of schedule amongst all based on the rushing statistic category behind an offensive line that brings back all 5 of their starters, a full base of continuity that should continue to align Chuba Hubbard to being a top 20 running back for another consecutive year. Number 19, we have another rookie running back. We have TreVeyon Henderson. Now, when we talk about rookie running backs over the course of the last 5 seasons who have been selected within the 2nd round, there are 11 running backs of such. 9 of those stayed healthy within their rookie year. Of course, we're excluding Jonathan Brooks and Breece Hall. Of the remaining 9 running backs, 5 of them were top 24, primarily because when we talk about Zach Charbonnet, James Cook, and A.J. Dillon, they were all drafted to teams that already had pre-established top 20 fantasy running backs the year prior. Of course, Charbonnet joined Kenneth Walker, Dillon joined Aaron Jones, and of course, Cook joined Singletary. Now, there's Rhamondre Stevenson count, seeing as he ranked as the number 27 overall running back in 2024. I don't see him counting, primarily because over the course of the last 2 seasons, Rhamondre Stevenson, highly inefficient with a 3.91 yard per carry average. And from what we have seen over the course of the career of Josh McDaniels, the new offensive coordinator, of course, returning to the New England Patriots, he has been able to elevate running backs of the caliber of Henderson. Going back to the 2018 and 2019 campaigns of James White, in 2018 was number 8 overall, number 10 amongst all running backs in terms of fantasy points per game on average. And even in 2019, when they had Sony Michel in the mix, James White still finished as the number 22 overall running back, number 27 in terms of fantasy points per game on average in 15 full games played. We would anticipate TreVeyon Henderson to kind of fill into that role and dominate on the ground and through the air for the entirety of the season. Number 20 to close out this tier is Breece Hall. Again, with a new offensive coordinator and a new coaching staff as a whole, who currently don't have a commitment to the future of Breece Hall. And even though he is expected to be the starting running back of this organization, from what we have seen from Tanner Engstrom, of course, the former passing game coordinator of the Lions in 2023 and 2024, of course, he has learned from Ben Johnson, and hopefully he's going to give his running backs a lot of opportunity share, as the Lions over the course of the last 3 seasons were top 3 in running back opportunities in each of those seasons. But we may see a 3-headed monster with, of course, Breece Hall, Justin Fields, and Braelon Allen. And if that's going to take place, of course, I don't expect Breece Hall to perform anything beyond the number 20 overall position, because in order to do so, he would need to find himself finding a lot of receiving upside, which over the course of Hall's career, he's been highly utilized within the receiving category. So if we have Justin Fields not checking it down in his direction, that's not a great sign. And especially when you get down into the red zone, if you have to compete for red zone utilization with Braelon Allen, who is the short yardage, guy within this offense, and Justin Fields, who could very easily pull every rushing attempt on a zone read option, we're going to be in a situation with Breece Hall, again, at number 20, is a safe selection. Now, before we continue, again, I want to remind you guys, for those of you who are trying to get your hands on my 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Guide and all-encompassing rankings, whether it's full PPR, half PPR, you can travel down to the description and check out the Patreon. That's where you'll find the draft guide exclusively there. Again, for those of you who are interested in, of course, getting the draft guide, asking me unlimited questions, getting those rankings up to date every single week for the remainder of the season, and of course, getting access to the private Discord server. Check that out today. Thank you very much for all the support. All right, let's continue on with our number 21. We have RJ Harvey. Now, when we talk about, rookie running backs, this is the 4th on today's episode within the top 24. Because again, we have seen a lot of history of success. When you draft a running back as early as RJ Harvey has been selected, very similar to TreVeyon Henderson, we have seen about an 83% success rate when a running back is selected in the 2nd round, joins an offense that doesn't have a pre-established top 20 fantasy back. So RJ Harvey and his preseason usage thus far all speak to his potential for success in 2025 in an offense that is continuing to take steps forward and should be one of the biggest threats in the National Football League. I mean, again, late last season, this Broncos team was averaging over 30 points per game. So when we take into account, they're going to be in a lot of situations in which the goal line red zone opportunities will be available. RJ Harvey could seize those opportunities. And if in fact he's able to, of course, he'll continue to even find more upside within the receiving category, considering amongst all teams last season, the Denver Broncos were number 3 in terms of highest checkdown rate to their running backs within the receiving category. The Denver Broncos have targeted their running backs the 2nd most times amongst all teams in just the last 2 seasons. So again, a lot of opportunity available to him. He could be the Joker role. He could be the Alvin Kamara of this Sean Payton offense. Number 22, we have DeAndre Swift, who is ranked as a top 24 overall running back in every season of his career. He's averaged over 11 fantasy points per game in every season of his career. And with the new offensive coordinator in Ben Johnson coming in from the Lions, and they formerly being teammates, as Ben Johnson was there in 2021 when DeAndre Swift was. Of course, DeAndre Swift was hyper efficient in that season as well. We are anticipating a lot of utilization from DeAndre Swift, as this team hasn't brought in any other competition that could potentially impact his upside. Sure, there may be some sprinkles of utilization from Roschon Johnson, Monangai. There are some opportunities for other running backs to get in the mix. But considering DeAndre Swift is the most talented back of the bunch, we have huge upgrades to the interior of this offensive line with 3 new starters. I'm anticipating him to have a fantastic season. Of course, continue his streak of being in the top 24 of the conversation. Now, if we wanted to add another piece to the overall mix of this play, it would be in the form of DeAndre Swift, who as of right now, his rushing yards are not high enough in comparison to where I even believe he's going to be able to produce. As I continue to scroll here, I'm looking for DeAndre Swift. Here he is, 799.5 rushing yards. Again, he's been able to accomplish this number on multiple occasions over the course of his entire career. It's only sitting there because of the uncertainty as to how this rotation of this backfield is going to set out. But as of right now, again, this is a pretty solid play overall going into this upcoming season. If you were to go ahead and make it a perfect play within the upcoming season, Again, that's 10 turning into 100. So for those of you who are interested in potentially following this given play, you can go ahead and travel down to the description, check out Betr today, and of course, get those draft rankings and of course, weekly rankings for the remainder of the season using code Andrew. All that information down below. All right, let's continue on with the next running back I wanted to mention is David Montgomery, of course, of the Detroit Lions. In the last 2 seasons, David Montgomery has averaged 15.03 and 14.55 fantasy points per game on average. That's the number 12 and number 13 ranked within those given years. And yet I have him sitting at number 23 because, sure, we do expect to see an ascension of Jahmyr Gibbs, hopefully more touches in the direction of Jahmyr Gibbs. But I don't see David Montgomery disappearing altogether because when we talk about his utilization within this offense prior to his injury in 2024, there was only a 1 rushing attempt difference between him and Jahmyr Gibbs, only an 11 target difference between the two, and only a 2 total touchdown difference between the two. This running back split was nearly identical, and going into this upcoming season, even if David Montgomery is going to lose potentially 3 to 4 to 5 touches per game on average, he is still going to be a top 24 running back based on the offense he's associated with, and of course, the rushing touchdown upside he continues to possess. Number 24 is Tony Pollard. Of course, Tyjae Spears is currently dealing with a high ankle sprain. And if that's going to continue to be something that plagues Tyjae Spears, who of course couldn't stay healthy all of the 2024 season, we should see Tony Pollard succeed because of his absence. Last season, without Spears in the lineup, we were seeing Tony Pollard average 23 opportunities per game and 12.5 fantasy points per game, playing 82% of the offensive snaps. When given a elite level of opportunity in the situation, of course, he's going to be able to elevate. Now, even though he wasn't the most efficient running back, it doesn't matter. If you're getting touches, it is going to lead you to the promised land in fantasy football. And despite the fact they had a 3-14 win-loss record, if we add Cam Ward into the mix, we add into the mix more improvements to this offense, it should lead to potentially more valuable opportunities for Tony Pollard, especially down within the red zone in 2025. Now, our number 25 is Isiah Pacheco, who I've been very much so bullish on this offseason, but my once bullish take is now kind of hit a speed bump, primarily because we have heard rumors that the Chiefs are looking to potentially trade for a running back. Could this running back be Bijan Robinson Jr., who we'll talk about in just a moment? Or can it be someone like Breece Hall, who we talked about already, who again, the organization of the Jets are not committed to? Time will tell. But if in fact no trade is committed to, and Isiah Pacheco is expected to see an unimpeded volume of opportunity, we saw in the beginning of the 2024 season, prior to his injury, 21 opportunities per game and 14.2 fantasy points per game. Again, at the current ADP, if that level of opportunity is going to be there, he's a steal and a league-winning running back. But in the event in which a trade has taken place, and these rumors are true, and the Chiefs are looking for another running back to go ahead and have a committee situation, of course, that's why I've lowered Isiah Pacheco, as I don't want to invest too highly in him and get burnt in the long run. Number 26, we have Tyrone Tracy, who from weeks 5 through 18 of last season took over this backfield because of the Devin Singletary injury and didn't look back, averaging 14.5 opportunities per game and nearly 12 fantasy points per game with 70% of the offensive snaps. Now you have an offense that sure is going to have Cam Scatterboo, and I do expect, and we'll talk about Scatterboo in just a moment, I do expect it to be a rotation eventually. Maybe not immediately in the beginning, but eventually. But luckily for Tyrone Tracy, of course, he has himself a lot of opportunities within the receiving category, which of course he excels in as a former wide receiver in college. Russell Wilson, amongst all quarterbacks in the last 2 seasons for back-to-back years, has been number 1 at the quarterback position in terms of check down rate. If a lot of opportunities are going in the direction of Tyrone Tracy within the receiving category with a lot of negative game scripts this year, should be a fantastic option as our number 26. Number 27, we have Aaron Jones, who last season was number 16 overall from weeks 1 through 17 and number 18 in terms of fantasy points per game on average. Again, averaging 19.3 opportunities per game and over 13 fantasy points per game. The Minnesota Vikings were truly committed to giving their running backs opportunities. They ranked number 13 amongst all teams last year. But as we approach the 2025 season, we should anticipate an opportunity split with Jordan Mason. Over the course of this week, we have seen Kevin O'Connell, the head coach and primary play caller of this offense, come out and say that we're going to see a lot of utilization out of Jordan Mason. If that's going to be the case, of course, it's going to keep both these running backs fresh. It's going to hopefully keep Aaron Jones healthy for the entirety of the season. A run-heavy approach and an improved offensive line, you would anticipate that Aaron Jones should still be within this top 30 category. Number 28 is Kaleb Johnson, who again is a rookie running back. And when we talk about the past 5 seasons of rookie running backs selected within the 3rd round of their NFL draft, there have only been 3 running backs out of 15 that have finished within the top 36 rankings. Those running backs being Tyjae Spears, Devon Achane, and Antonio Gibson. Now, in the case of Achane and Tyjae Spears within their rookie seasons, of course, they played behind Mostert and Derrick Henry. So there was legitimate competition within the mix. And that's kind of what the overall situation is going to look like for Kaleb Johnson this season. He's going to have competition in the form of Jaylen Warren, who we'll talk about in just one more rank. But as it currently stands, when you're filling into the role of Najee Harris, and you're expected to potentially see 200 plus rushing attempts, and maybe even be the Tyler Algier of this offense. The reason why I say Tyler Algier is because the OC of the Pittsburgh Steelers is Arthur Smith. He is the former head coach of the Falcons. And a couple years back, in 2022, Algier and Cordero Patterson, if you guys remember, were a two-headed monster in that backfield. And if we're going to see Kaleb Johnson utilized within that role, of course, a lot of opportunities should still go in his direction, as this team last season gave their running backs the third most opportunities amongst all teams with 536. So, of course, Kaleb Johnson will certainly have value going into this season. Now, speaking of the value of Jaylen Warren, again, he should be the Cordero Patterson of this offense. He has not played at all during the preseason, and he's expected to actually be the starting running back come week 1. A running back who finished as the number 25 overall back in 2023 with 200 total touches and 61 receptions. Last season, in the 9 games in which he had 10 or more touches, averaged 9.5 fantasy points per game and a half PPR, 4.26 yards per carry, 3.21 yards after contact per attempt, in an offense that gives their running backs a boatload of opportunities, which again should sustain both Johnson and Warren together. And another promising statistic is that Aaron Rodgers, amongst all quarterbacks last season, had the second highest checkdown rate. And over the course of his career, he's been in the top 5 on many of occasions within that category. So of course, Jaylen Warren, as the primary receiving back in 2023, was able to finish as a top 25 back because of 61 receptions. Should be a promising overall start for this upcoming season that hopefully he can maintain for the remainder of 2025. Number 30 to close out this tier is Jordan Mason. Like I mentioned moments ago, Aaron Jones is going to be splitting this backfield. Kevin O'Connell pretty much alluded to the fact that this is going to be a 1A, 1B overall situation, and that both players, in quote unquote, are going to touch the ball a lot this season. Last season, as a member of the 49ers, Jordan Mason was fantastic, averaging 15 plus fantasy points per game on 21 opportunities per game, and over the course of his entire career with the 49ers, averaging 5.3 yards per carry and 3.47 yards after contact per attempt in the last 3 seasons. We've been anticipating his efficiency, his youth, and of course, the fact that this team wants to be a run-first attack to go ahead and give him enough opportunity to be in the top 30 conversation. Number 31, we have Joe Mixon, who we're still waiting to kind of hear more information regarding his injury status. Obviously, the goal is still week 1 against the Rams, but until we hear further information, he's continuing to lower within my rankings. If you are considering drafting him, please consider also drafting Nick Chubb, so that if in fact he does not play come week 1 or potentially misses even a couple games, perhaps even starts on the IR or the PUP, you will have the opportunity of still having the starting running back of this offense that will be of value for fantasy purposes in the form of Nick Chubb. Now, last season when Joe Mixon was healthy, he was a dominant force, averaging 18.8 fantasy points per game, scored 13 rushing touchdowns in his 14 total games. There's a lot of potential for upside, assuming he's healthy in 2025. Number 32 is Bijan Robinson Jr. He's currently being shopped around and on the trade block, and I 100% expect him to be traded based on all the reports that we have heard, whether it's from Ian Rappaport or the NFL Network, or even from Dan Quinn, the head coach of the Washington Commanders, has specifically came out and said that, yeah, we're pretty much moving on. We're going to utilize other running backs within the goal line conversation, all that kind of noise. So where are the potential landing spots for Bijan Robinson Jr.? Well, these are the thoughts that I currently had. The Kansas City Chiefs, of course, have been rumored to potentially be looking for a running back. And of course, they're outside of the NFC, so that kind of works. The Browns have also been rumored to be looking for a running back. The Dolphins are dealing with the Achane injury and don't have a bruiser back that could fill in, Bijan Robinson as the Raheem Mostert of that offense. And of course, the Bears may be looking for their David Montgomery, perhaps. So there are 4 options in which he could land in all those situations and be incredibly relevant for fantasy purposes. So I'm still drafting him at a top 32 capacity because when healthy last season was averaging 14 fantasy points per game from weeks 1 through 8 with 16 opportunities per game, which in all of those offenses could very easily find that kind of level of shares immediately come week 1. Number 33 is Zach Charbonnet. Again, like I mentioned before, if you're going to draft Kenneth Walker or you're considering it, please draft Zach Charbonnet. But even if you don't select, Kenneth Walker, I think Zach Charbonnet is a fantastic investment. Last season, in the absence of Kenneth Walker, Charbonnet was averaging 17.62 fantasy points per game, over 4.7 yards per carry, 3.8 yards after contact per attempt. It was number 6 amongst all running backs with a minimum of 100 rushing attempts in terms of fantasy points per attempt with a 0.78 average. Incredible production within an offense whose offensive coordinator, the new one, Clint Kubiak, has been speaking glowingly about the potential of Zach Charbonnet, with the Seattle Seahawks probably giving their running backs top 10 opportunity share amongst all teams in the National Football League. I'm anticipating both Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker to be relevant this upcoming season, and if Kenneth Walker goes down with an injury, we all know that Zach Charbonnet has top 15 upside at a base minimum. Number 34 is Travis Etienne. It looks like this is going to probably be a 1A, 1B situation with him and Tank Bigsby to begin. And even though it is incredibly difficult to figure out who is going to turn out of this backfield as the number one option, it's really just a question of, do we even want to invest in any of the shares? In my mind, I'm potentially investing in guys like Bijan Robinson or, Bigsby, who have lesser overall ADPs. So the draft capital I'm utilizing isn't going to burn me if they don't turn out. In comparison to Travis Etienne, who has to turn out considering where he's going at an average of like RB31 on, multiple different platforms. He hasn't been an efficient runner, but he's been a great receiving threat out of the backfield. The Buccaneers, amongst all teams last season, with Liam Cohen as their OC, the new head coach of the Jaguars, were number 2 in terms of running back targets. So again, we should see Travis Etienne utilized heavily within that conversation. But again, this could be a committee that falls apart relatively soon and into the hands of that rookie running back, Tootin. Speaking of rookie running backs, let's talk about Jaydon Blue. Last season, once Rico Dowdle took over this offense, from weeks 3 through 18, 19 opportunities per game and 12.3 fantasy points per game. Brian Schottenheimer, as the primary play caller of either the Seattle Seahawks from 2018 to 2020 or as the Dallas Cowboys OC in the last 2 seasons, has been able to help produce a top 22 running back in each of those 5 years. Chris Carson from 2018 to 2020, ranking as RB 15, 11, and 17. Tony Pollard ranked as RB 15 in 2023, and Rico Dowdle ranked as number 22. Javonte Williams is not competition in my mind. Since his ACL tear, he is not the same running back that came out of North Carolina. He's been averaging 3.61 yards per attempt, 2.52 yards after contact per attempt. Jaydon Blue is an incredible receiving back who is going to get himself on the field initially within the receiving category, but then eventually take over as the full-time starter of the Dallas Cowboys. Number 36, we have JCM, who again is the rookie running back who is expected to take over in the event of Bijan Robinson Jr. eventually being traded. It's not a matter of if he's going to get traded. It's a matter of when he's going to get traded. So as it currently stands, with Bijan Robinson potentially out of the loop, we may have a running back committee of sorts, or we may have a competition in which we could see JCM just kind of take over. Austin Eckler is someone that I wanted to mention, but when we talk about Bijan Robinson's opportunity share last season prior to his injury, we're talking about 16.25 opportunities per game. And even in games in which we saw both Austin Eckler and Bijan Robinson heavily committed within the offense, Bijan Robinson was still getting the vast majority of red zone utilization, which we should see in the case of JCM. As it currently stands, if I'm looking for potential shares of this Washington Commanders backfield, this is the running back that I'm committing to, or I'm looking in the direction of the veteran Austin Eckler, who last season in the 11 games in which he played with Bijan Robinson was still averaging 7.38 fantasy points per game on 9 opportunities per game. But in the 4 games in which he played without Bijan Robinson as the primary RB1 of the Commanders, was averaging 13.73 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. He won't get the full workload this season, but maybe early on, because of his veteran position, he could start as the primary number 1 RB in a post-Bijan Robinson Jr. era of the Washington Commanders 2025 season. Number 38 is Tank Bigsby. I mentioned it before. I do anticipate him to probably take majority of the rushing workload of this offense, and for this to be a committee of sorts. He was highly efficient last season. Again, 4.59 yards per carry, 3.77 yards after contact per attempt. Cohen has utilized a running back combo back in his days in 2024 with the Buccaneers of Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. This could be the new Rachaad White, Bucky Irving. But it just purely depends on if, in fact, Tank Bigsby is going to be given that workload of opportunity share on the ground. Because last season, when he was given 14 or more touches, he was averaging over 16 fantasy points per game. The Jaguars last season ranked 21 amongst all teams in terms of RB opportunities, while the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Liam Cohen were top 5 in that category, which we're hoping this offense can get within so we can see even more relevancy for someone like Tank Bigsby. Number 39 is Braelon Allen. I mentioned it just a couple days ago. This is going to be a 3-headed monster. And while we're continuing to hear the head coach of this football team speak glowingly about the potential of Braelon Allen, when the head coach of the football team is speaking highly of you, there's a potential which Braelon Allen could be, theoretically, the David Montgomery of this offense. If in fact that ends up being the case with Justin Fields, Braelon Allen, and Breece Hall in the mix, of course, it's more of a, I need to see it before I commit to it, but the draft capital that is being utilized in order to bring in Braelon Allen to your fantasy football teams is not enough to where I am afraid of the investment of this opportunity, especially when we take into account last season in games in which he had 9 or more touches, was averaging over 10 fantasy points per game. With opportunity comes success, and that very easily could be the case if this football team is running the ball 40 plus times per game. Number 40, we have J.K. Dobbins, who again, last season was incredible pre-injury. Number 14 overall amongst all running backs, 14.03 fantasy points per game. But now joins this backfield as the number 2 to be able to kind of take over the RB2 role that Audric Estime and, of course, Jaleel McLaughlin were presenting last season for this offense. But now that he takes over that role, sure, there's going to be opportunities to where he could end up being highly efficient and dig out a little bit more of a workload opportunity share from RJ Harvey. But considering the draft investment, the receiving utilization of Harvey, the preseason utilization that we have witnessed thus far, I'm anticipating J.K. Dobbins to, again, be the handcuff that is going to get him a couple sprinkles of opportunities per game, but nothing in the position to where he could be a weekly start come week 1. Number 41 is Cam Skattebo, who, again, is returning from injury slowly, but again, we're not going to probably see him get heavily into the mix until a couple weeks into the season. But once we do, this could be a two-headed monster where Tyrone Tracy is utilized, as a receiving threat. And in the early down workload, the short yardage, even the goal line could be absorbed by Cam Skattebo. Time will tell. But once this team is in negative game scripts, he's even presented to be a decent receiving back. Again, he's not the fastest. He's, again, very shifty. He's going to run you over. He, again, is like an Austin Eckler. I'm looking at Austin Eckler on the list. He kind of plays like Austin Eckler at times. So, again, that's the kind of level of potential that we have here. But in regards to the upside of him, considering the committee situation and, of course, Tyrone Tracy, I feel comfortable with him as a number 41 investment. Number 42 is Rhamondre Stevenson, continuing on with handcuffs, who are just going to continue to be in that kind of glorified role. If something happens to their starters, of course, they're going to have value. It's Rhamondre Stevenson, who has been highly inefficient the last couple of years, primarily because of terrible offensive play calling and terrible offensive line play. And hopefully those two things improve. And maybe, just maybe, Rhamondre Stevenson within a Josh McDaniels offense, when we look back at the 2021 New England Patriots, when we had Damian Harris and Rhamondre Stevenson, Damian Harris was the number 13 overall fantasy running back. Maybe Rhamondre Stevenson now can be the Damian Harris, while TreVeyon Henderson fills into his role. Time will tell. Maybe he could be the Sony Michel, while, TreVeyon Henderson is the James White when we look back at the 2019 season. There's always the possibility that in which he could stay within the top 36 category. Time will tell. Number 43, we have Quinshon Judkins. Again, he hasn't even signed with the team yet. There's rumors that the Browns are looking to trade for a running back. They could be interested in the services of someone like Bijan Robinson Jr. if it's potentially available to them. Time will tell. But of course, they have Jerome Ford, they have Dylan Sampson, and we still don't have a clear understanding as to how this backfield is going to shape out. And if you're going to invest in Judkins, expect this to be a late second half of the season kind of investment that would flourish. Ray Davis is our 44. Even though he ranked as RB 38 last season, it's because he scored 6 touchdowns. If we're anticipating him to score very similar volume of touchdowns, then sure, he will be able to outproduce this number, but he's just a glorified high-end kind of handcuff. He's one of the more valuable handcuffs considering the offense he's associated with and, of course, the value that James Cook presents on a weekly basis. So keep an eye on someone like Ray Davis if you are drafting James Cook just to have that backfield committed to. Number 45, the final running back I wanted to mention is Tyjae Spears, who last season in games with Tony Pollard, nearly 9 opportunities per game and 8.5 fantasy points per game. Once healthy, returning from the high ankle sprain, should be in a fantastic position to succeed considering a lot of negative game scripts and a lot of receiving upside will be available based on his skill set and how the Titans offense wants to utilize him. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my top 45 running back rankings. Again, thank you everybody for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with my wide receiver rankings for this upcoming weekend's drafts. Again, if you guys want my all-encompassing rankings at all positions, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, and flex, half and full PPR, and weekly Sunday morning rankings for the remainder of the season, be sure to go ahead, travel down to the description, check out Betr, and you can take advantage of the opportunity of putting together some plays and, of course, getting those rankings for the remainder of the season in order to help you capture a 2025 Fantasy Football Championship. All right, that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.